Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Tamani, and along with me is Monica Sengel-Jones. This is a presentation for Queer in Wikipedia. We are going to present to you an overview of the report titled Unreliable Guidelines, Reliable Sources, and Marginalized Communities, and in French, English, and Spanish Wikipedia. The report was published in June 2021 as a result of an Art+Feminism research project that took place from September 2020 to March 2021. We were the lead researchers and authors of the project, and we also had the support of an advisory committee made up of Wikipedians and researchers from different regions.
Thank you, Mel. I'm Monica Schengel-Jones, and along with Amber Burson, who's not here today, we're so pleased to be presenting our report to this conference. The goal behind our project was to understand the effects of the reliable source guidelines in these three Wikipedias. And we really were aiming to interrogate what this means, and then also how authority of sources is negotiated among the editorial community. I want to just talk a little bit about the methodology that we used in our report. And I'll tease, the link to the report is at the end of our presentation. It's freely available to download and use. We had three parts to our project. We started off with a close reading of the guidelines, the reliable source guidelines in French, Spanish, and English Wikipedia. And then we had community conversations to see how these were being used in action, how editors in the art and feminism community in particular were making sense of them and what kind of barriers or challenges they were coming up against in using source guidelines, which really are, and it's likely obvious for this audience, but I'll just repeat, reliability and source reliability is kind of a cornerstone of what makes the Wikipedia's encyclopedia kind of have integrity. But we wanted to understand better how reliability was understood itself. So that's kind of where our starting point was. And then we published this report. So yeah, number 3. Thank you, Mel. I'll just briefly say the report goes into greater detail, but for English Wikipedia, the reliable source guidelines are among the oldest, and they've had a lot of edits, but a lot of those took place in the early years of the encyclopedia. And one thing that we noted is that there actually is no definition of reliability, and the page itself isn't upheld to the same standards that encyclopedia pages are, because it's a guideline, not an encyclopedia page, but that's something we'll talk more about. And so this is what the English Wikipedia reliable source guidelines were like. And then I'll let Mel talk a little bit about the Spanish version.
Well, on Spanish Wikipedia, there is an official policy named Reliable Sources, and the page was created in 2008 as a translation of the English project page that Monica just referred to before. And the editorial process consisted of the interpretation of specific terms, the addition of some original content, the definition of the page structure, and its enforcement. The reliability of a source is determined by its publication process, the degree of acceptance and use, and also by the degree of acceptance and the use by third parties. Editors are warned of using primary sources and self-publications. Since 2009, the content of this policy hasn't been significantly updated because new proposals have been rejected on the basis of that they aren't a product of a consensus, and no further translations of the English version are allowed. As a result of all this, The policy it is much more general than the other two language versions, and there is quite a lot of room for interpretation and individual bias from editors. One of the first conclusions of our work is that source authority on Wikipedia is facilitated by social and technical processes that elevate the decisions of a small number of self-selected editors. And this process also has privileged academic media and presses. And we're going to see why this is problematic for marginalized communities. Also, we were able to identify another set of findings. The first one is the lack of rigor. And what do we mean with lack of rigor? Basically, that the concept of reliability isn't defined in the guidelines. So there is a practical use of the term reliability, but it isn't defined by itself. Also, academic sources aren't used in the construction of their content. According to the guidelines, academic sources are the gold standard of reliability. However, they don't use them. Also, epistemological criticism of academia and media isn't covered in the guidelines. There is no mention of systemic biases in secondary sources. The impact of this is that, for instance, sources about indigenous communities don't fit the current criteria because many of them are primary sources, or the ones that are secondary sources can have systemic biases. Another impact of this is that Wikipedia contributors don't have a frame of reference for epistemic criticism to secondary sources. Also, relevant type of sources for marginalized communities are left out. This is the case of blogs or pamphlets or press releases that are published by communities, by organizations on these subject areas. And finally, there are power dynamics between contributors from different regions in the same language version. This is the case, for example, of editors from France and editors from Quebec on the case of French Wikipedia, or editors from the US and editors from Africa. The concept of reliability is not the same for all these editors, and there tends to be some power dynamics between editors from the global north, especially.
Thank you, Mel. The second finding that we had is about how the reliability guidelines are created. So as Mel's just described, we showed that it's not just about what constitutes a reliable source, but it's who gets to decide. And in the ways in which guidelines are created in these three Wikipedias, there's an explicit assumption that if you disagree on a guideline, the onus is on you to say so. And we found that this is a bit of a problem because silence becomes then a signal of consent. And in practice, this privileges those editors who are more experienced with the platform or have the time and the interest in understanding Wikipedia's editorial backend and then participating in it. Mel, if you want to advance to the next slide. I think that this, as I was just saying, it privileges those more experienced editors. And then if you wanted to go on to the next slide, it means that the guidelines have been kind of solidified through the consensus of a very small number of participants. And also a lot of this happened in the past. And so contributors today may not know where to go to participate in these discussions about the guidelines themselves, and, maybe come in to introduce research or ways of thinking about the concept of reliability. Granted, there are in English Wikipedia, like the Reliable Source Notice Board, which is where often one source will get kind of interrogated, but this is a very kind of hidden space for many editors. And these discussion spaces can also be toxic environments. So we really just wanted to highlight that this editorial process has pitfalls and challenges to it. And back to you.
Thanks, Monica. Our third and last finding was that the work of trainers is essential for this process because trainers field questions and provide a buffer between the platform and the interest of newcomers. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to bring new people, new communities to Wikipedia. And we wanted to highlight that. Our report ends with some recommendations. Some of them are related to the content of the reliable sources themselves, and others are related to community processes. In this case, we are just going to focus on the first type of recommendations, and because we think it might be of more interest to the Queering Wikipedia community. The first recommendation is to decenter English Wikipedia's definition of a reliable source, and also the Western-centric biases that we have found in our close reading of the guidelines. The second recommendation is that guidelines should be improved with references to scholarship in the social sciences and humanities that addresses the historical and cultural specificities of the concept of reliability.
Our report also offers ways that editors might address biases in scholarship and news media, which may make claims to objectivity. I think that it would be important to add this kind of rigor and provide guidance to editors on how they might evaluate the reliability and be more inclusive of reliable sources that often are considered primary sources, not secondary sources. But these primary sources often are reliable and crucial for providing information about marginalized communities. And they're listed here, and we give more details on how we might do this in our report. And if you want to advance to the next slide, I'll just go over one of those methods, which is this idea of triangulation, where you might kind of compare and contrast a couple of different sources that address the topic, either directly or tangentially, in order to come to an assessment. So that's one of the methods that we suggest. And again, our report also has some suggestions on how both the community might participate in the ongoing construction of what a reliable source is, as well as how we might make these guidelines more rigorous and inclusive. So let's see here. I think that's a real priority for us in creating this report. And we really appreciate your attention to this. Personally, I really hope it's useful for participants at the Queering Wikipedia conference. I'm so glad that you're here and thinking about these topics. And our report hyperlink is here. It's open access to you. Please download it, read it, share it, and let us know how you're thinking about the reliable source guidelines in kind of harmony with this and what you do next. We would love to stay in touch with you. And thank you again, Mel, also for presenting this with me. It's been such a pleasure to work with you again. And Amber Burson, I want to give a shout out to our third research lead on this project. So thank you as well to our funder, WikiCred, and Art & Feminism.
Thanks.
I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.